This is a guide to using the visual lesson plan. Okay, so this is slightly different to the other two formats and maybe less familiar to you. So I'll be going through each of the aspects and what needs to be included. Okay, so as per usual, you've got the box for the learning outcomes at the top there. These are the most important aspects of your planning for learning. Reason being that you need to have an idea of where your students are headed by the end of the lesson, so that you can link in all of your activities and resources according to where you want them to be. Okay, there are details on the Planning for Learning site about how those learning outcomes need to be written. You need to be stating what the student will be able to do by the end of the lesson. Okay, so using words such as know and understand are not particularly useful to you, because it's going to be difficult for you to measure whether they've actually understood something, whereas you will be able to measure whether they can apply it, whether they can create something as a result of what you've done during the lesson, okay, and as a result of assessing whether they can do that or not. Ideally in a lesson you'll have 3 main learning outcomes. This may be more, particularly if you're doing project-based learning, where maybe your learning outcomes are spanning a few lessons or a number of lessons, which means that the students are working towards those learning outcomes over time. Okay, so bearing in mind that the majority of lessons your students will not be able to get through them more than maybe about 3 learning outcomes. Okay. The next place to go on your learning plan is the big picture. This is one of 2 things. It could be that you detail at what point you are in the scheme of work, so the week number, the lesson number, the session number, the big picture in terms of class size, teachers taking this particular module, just detailing all those facts about the lesson. What you might also like to do is perhaps set an overarching question for your lesson, so you can see where this lesson maybe fits in with the bigger picture. Okay, so the big picture is this overarching question that we're working towards over the next 6 weeks, and then this lesson is one component of that. There have been annotated lesson plans, successful and unsuccessful, put into the Planning for Learning site, so take a look at those and that may help you with this side of things a little bit more. Okay, the next few boxes are Stretch and Challenge, E&D, Maths and English and Employability. Those aspects are part of every single lesson plan. You've been given boxes on this lesson plan for each, and so you'd fill that in with any aspect of your lesson that relates to those aspects, how you're encouraging students to develop maths and English and employability skills, how equality and diversity is being embedded, and how students are being stretched and challenged. For ideas about how to embed that into your lesson, take a look at the Planning for Learning site, which has information about each of those aspects. Okay, there are other boxes that need to be filled out, engagement and ILT. So you might be looking to engage your learners through fast pace of activities, perhaps working in groups, perhaps working in pairs, perhaps doing a research project. However you think you're engaging learners in your lesson, just make a note of it in the smiley face. ILT is just technology in terms of in the lesson, outside of the lesson, what you're using, what they're using, whether they're using mobiles, computers, and perhaps particular programs or resources that they're using during the lesson. So just write down any technologies that are within your lesson. You should be trying to get at least one aspect of technology in most of your lessons to enable learners to develop that area of their skills. Okay. Assessment for learning and key lesson questions are additional boxes on this lesson plan. Assessment for learning or measuring for progress, anything that you're doing within the lesson to question learners, to check their knowledge, to check that they're able to move on. Have a look on the Planning for Learning website about ideas that could go in this box, but you're detailing anything within your lesson that means that you're assessing for learning or measuring their progress. Key lesson questions is quite a nice thing to plan in advance of a lesson sometimes. It might be that you'd like to plan the questions in advance of the lesson to ensure that they're higher order enough, to ensure that you're pushing learners to where you want them to be by the end of the lesson. So sometimes planning for questions in advance of a lesson is quite a useful process, and some of you may wish to do that. In terms of asking questions effectively, take a look on the Planning for Learning site about ideas about how you can ask questions effectively. Okay, so these are most of the boxes on the visual learning plan. The final box is just the stages of the lesson described, and you might like to do this earlier on than filling out the other boxes. Again, you're questioned, will you use CSPAR? We're aware that some of you are now moving into doing project-based learning or other kind of lesson types that don't fit the CSPAR strategy. However, we're aware that many of you are using it and still want to continue using it, so we'd like to encourage you to carry that on if that is the case. So connect, share, present, apply, recall and review. Just put those little aspects in the stages of the lesson. So you're going to describe the stages of the lesson. What's happening at each stage? What is the activity? What's the teacher doing? What are the students doing? Where do you want to take the learners at each stage of the lesson? Okay. On the reverse of each lesson plan, you've got some ideas in each of the boxes about what you might like to include. So if you've missed anything that I've mentioned or want more information, that might help. What we've also done on the Planning for Learning site there are annotated examples of each lesson plan, successful and unsuccessful ones, so that you can see what your learning plan needs to look like and what you're aiming for in terms of content.